Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. I hope everyone's doing well. My name's Luis Alonso. I'm here as a representative of the Hispanic Googler Network, as well as the Authors at Google group. Okay, so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Chef Jose Garces, the executive chef of Philadelphia's Amada. He's going to be speaking to us about his new book, Latin Evolution, and we're all very excited about that. Just a few quick notes about him. He, as I said, is the executive chef of Amada, as well as other restaurants in Philadelphia, all of which have received great reviews. He recently won the Iron Chef America competition with Bobby Flay, of which we're all very excited to hear. And he's also been nominated by the James Beard Foundation for Best Chef Mid-Atlantic Region. So at this point, I'll leave it up to him. Please give him a great welcome and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here at Google. And one of the reasons I'm here is really to talk about and promote my new cookbook, my first book, Latin Evolution, which was published by Lake Isle Press. Hiroko Kiffner, she's here in the back. And she really made my dream come true in terms of writing this cookbook and the vision that was first portrayed. And that was, really a special moment that not every chef or every cookbook author really gets to at least from my perspective, gets to realize that. And the vision has come true. I'm really happy with the end product. And I want to talk to you briefly about, specifically about the book. One of the influences from the book is really, the main influences are really Latin cooking and three different types of regions of influence: Spain, South America, and Mexico, and some of the Caribbean as well. And really, I consider those three areas, we call it Latin evolution, although sometimes Spain is not considered Latin, it's European. But since the Spanish occupied many of those countries for several hundred years, it really left a lasting impression on all those areas, and it really kind of binds all three genres of cuisine together. Some of the things that really shaped my career is family traditions. My grandma, Mamita Amada, who I named my first restaurant after, an Ecuadorian lady, she's almost 90 years old and still makes very good arepas, tamales, still like an awesome cook. And she taught my mom how to cook. My mom taught me how to cook. And my mom is now teaching my wife how to cook. So this idea of traditions, just, passed down through the generations, and the ability to keep Latin traditions alive was really important to me. And the book is really a way to state that, and a way to really show how we can take modern or traditional recipes and convert them into more modern contemporary recipes. The book is about 10 years worth of work that I've been working in Latin restaurants for basically the past 10 years, and really looking and examining all these different traditional recipes through research, through travel. I've traveled extensively through Spain and Mexico, and a good example of that would be we do a scallop ceviche in the book. That typically, if you're in Ecuador, you would get just a very classic marinade of lime juice, salt, cilantro, nothing really. And you would get that usually on a beach or somewhere inland too. But what we do is we add in our recipe, we add truffles to it. We add Meyer lemons when they're in season. So really taking some like traditional recipes, but also incorporating some local ingredients, some high-end ingredients, and making it something really special. So you're not just dealing with a plain, simple scallop ceviche. The book is going to be challenging, I think, for some. It's geared towards the ambitious home cook and the young professional as well. I think a lot of the lessons in there will inspire young cooks and ambitious home cooks to really go beyond the normal cooking routine, really look into different forms of preparation. There's a lot of techniques in there that are more contemporary, more restaurant-style techniques that we were kind of fighting with in terms of putting them in the book, making things more simple. And I think leaving some of those techniques, such as sous vide cooking and using some things like soy lecithin to really show what's contemporary and what the chefs are doing now is an important message in the book as well. One of the other key important notes in the book is just my culinary background and how this kind of developed. I was born in Chicago from Ecuadorian parents. I grew up in like a white Irish Catholic neighborhood, not feeling, initially not feeling like that welcome, to be honest with you. But I think that definitely drove me to work hard. And in keeping my Latin roots, that was, just I just feel like it's been an important piece in my life. Grew up in Chicago, which was very ethnically diverse. It's a great food town, but you'll find everything from Polish to Mexican to Ethiopian. I mean, it's on the same level of diversity with New York, but I feel like there's bigger neighborhoods of each different ethnic group. And that was a profound influence as well. I went to Kendall College. It's a culinary school in Chicago. It was in Evanston at the time. And there I learned French classical culinary technique. And that has been the base of my cooking as well, is really going back to that classic technique along with a mix of Latin and traditional cooking has really helped to shape what you have today. It's really a hodgepodge of all of those different influences. I have been growing a lot in terms of the restaurants and my businesses in the last few years. I opened Amada, a Spanish Andalusian style tapas restaurant in 2005. And I've recently opened Tinto, a Basque restaurant, which you'll find some of those Basque-influenced recipes as well. And I recently opened Mercat a la Plancha, which is a Catalan-style tapas restaurant in Chicago and in the South Loop. And gosh, it's been I recently opened Distrito, which is a contemporary Mexican restaurant in University City, Philadelphia as well. And that has been open about 8 weeks, and it's been a pretty big splash thus far. It's a very fun concept. And I'm currently working on a new concept, which is called chifa, which is a Peruvian and Asian mix. Chifa is a style of cuisine from Peru. They have two different Asian styles in Peru that are, there's Nikkei, which is the Japanese and Peruvian fusion, and chifa, which is the Chinese and Peruvian mix. And we're planning a research trip there in November for about 10 days to really get a grasp on what that's all about and bring it back to Philadelphia. And that's one of the things that we do, that I do and my team does in terms of using travel and using research to bring some of those ideas back to the U.S. and incorporate them back into the restaurants, use that to educate and also to just really learn as well about different cultures. It's a fun aspect of what I do, and it's also directly related in the cookbook because that's really where it stems from. I'm going to open up the floor now for any questions. Does anyone have any questions on the book or any? Sure.
Hello? A couple of quick questions. One of the pictures up there shows, a couple of pictures up there show people sitting at a counter. Is that at Reading Terminal Market?
Sitting at a
counter with menu boards above them.
Yeah, that is That's a marquee that's above our bar at Distrito. It's a tequila bar, and that was inspired by a trip to La Merced, the market in Mexico City, where we found many of these markets had these marquees, and we state the daily tequilas and beverages on the marquees.
You mentioned using Meyer lemon in your ceviche.
Yes.
Is it acidic enough to actually cook the fish, or is it used as, do you add it later as a flavor?
One of my philosophies on ceviche is not really to cook the fish in the acid. I feel like that's an old practice, like an old technique where people would use the acidity to really cook and like mask the flavor of maybe an old fish or a fish that's not as fresh. So the acid is really meant to accent the fish, not so much to cook it. If it's more like a sushi style approach to making ceviche.
How you doing?
I'm great.
The book looks great. I
Thank
just
you.
looked through it. I happen to just get my copy now. I had two questions. A lot of this cookbook, as well as many other books that I have, almost always yield 4 servings.
Yes.
And people don't always make or want to make 4 servings. How do your recipes hold if somebody's going to pare it down for, say, 1 or 2? Are there certain parts of it that you may want to consider, going off recipe and a little bit more from a taste perspective? So that's the first question.
I think, well, I'll tell you what. I don't normally cook for 4. We usually cook for 40.
Sure.
So we had to pare them down from where they were, like really large batch amounts. And in testing them, we really made sure that we got that 4 number down, because that seems to be the consensus of what most people are. They're gonna cook. They're gonna cook for at least 2 to 4. Mm-hmm. So I feel like if you split the recipes in half, you should be in pretty good shape for at least 2. And then if you have a little left over,
there's nothing wrong with the leftovers. And then the other question I had, I was reading here about the sous vide approach, and I guess it's using like immersion circulators or water baths for people who don't have an immersion circulator or something along those lines. They're going to maybe be cooking over gas or cooking over an electric, or maybe using an oven to try to keep that temperature. Just some suggestions on technique.
I think that a good thermometer that'll basically that gives you an accurate reading is pretty good in terms of the short-term cooking for fish. There's certain ingredients that are not like fish and some vegetables that don't require long-term cooking, that don't present a health risk. So for those techniques, just really a water bath or a stovetop method that you can immerse the product into it and keep an accurate time. For instance, a piece of halibut, there's a halibut recipe in there, is only about 8 minutes at a certain temperature. So if the temperature fluctuates a degree here or there, it's going to be okay. And if you keep it in a small enough container, you should be fine as well.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming. I actually had a client took me to a restaurant in Philadelphia, and I was extremely impressed. Thank you. It was fantastic, and leads me to my question that all the selfish New Yorkers want to know is when are you planning to come to New York? It's better tapas and food that I've had in New York, and even being New York as the hub for it. And secondary related to that is, what is Philadelphia being kind of in a secondary culinary market, a restaurant market? Is that advantages and disadvantages? Do you need to go right to New York or Chicago or LA? Are there plans as you try to scale your operations and kind of footprint to go after those larger markets or more high profile markets?
Okay. I was just talking to Hiroko about coming back to New York, and I left New York in 2000. I'd been here for 5.5 years, and really did a lot of like the grunt work, line cooking, just working hard for 5 years, working hard and going out a lot, basically. And I decided at a certain point that I really needed to keep my career moving forward. And I got an opportunity to go to Philadelphia, not really thinking that I was going to be there for a long time, other than just open a restaurant, have my first chef experience. And what I found was a really great market that has a very nice microeconomy for restaurants. They're not really, they don't necessarily need the tourist or convention business, so it stays pretty tight. It's supported locally by local residents in the suburbs. So it ends up being where you have a restaurant business that's very viable and has a lot of legs, can last a long time. And it made it really conducive to opening these few other concepts. And I always had a vision to do 4 concepts: the Spanish tapas restaurant, the wine bar, which is Tinto, my Mexican concept, and now my Asian Latin concept. So I'm getting close to completing my goal in Philadelphia. I won't open any other restaurants. I am working on a whiskey bar, just something to have fun. It's a small space and really enjoy whiskey. Not a lot, but I enjoy it. But so the idea of having 4 concepts and then going to other markets has always been in the background. But I always wanted to ensure that whatever we did it on a high level and that we were able to maintain it. So that's kind of really the stage where I'm at. I've had a lot of opportunity to come back to New York. A lot of people have offered spaces in hotels, in restaurants, redos, and I have a lot of respect for the New York market, for the cooks and chefs that have been here for several years. I know how hard it is to really get into the limelight and be recognized. So I wouldn't want to just come in and splash, after being in Philly for the last 5 years. I would love to come back on my own terms, possibly with an apartment overlooking Central Park and a small, like 50 or 60 seat restaurant down below that I could dedicate everything to and not really be distracted by running businesses or trying to, be the next anybody. I would love to just come and dedicate myself to cooking, and that's like a dream. And we'll see how it goes. And I'm looking forward to that time, because that would have meant that everything went well. Yes.
Jeff, thanks so much for being here. Congratulations on all your recent and ongoing success. My wife and I got to see Iron Chef. We DVR'd it, so we watched it this weekend. I'm excited about you being here. So I wanted to ask you about that. It's such a great show. I love it. It's so over the top. You kept your game face on during the whole beginning. I was very proud of you. I didn't think I could take that seriously. I probably would have snickered a little bit. But once you were actually in the zone, I mean, it's different than being in a kitchen. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of cameras around you and what have you. And then you get the secret ingredient. I mean, what's going through your head? I love that your staff was like right there. I saw you guys like do a little toast and cheers each other at the end. But
yeah,
what was going on through your head as far as like, and how did you prioritize things as you went?
All right. Without getting myself in trouble with the producers of the show, I will answer that question. There is some planning involved, previous to, based on any number of variable ingredients. So when I got called to do the show, I was very anxious. I'd been waiting my turn. I myself am a huge fan of the show. And I was like, I can't wait till I get called to do the show. I was like chomping at the bit to do it. So when we got called, the one thing is I took it very seriously and did a lot of planning and a lot of, coordination with my chef team. We really planned and practiced ourselves very hard for several weeks, so that when we were on set and the ingredient was revealed, there wouldn't have to be a lot of communication. It would just be more like a little more mental, a few directions here and there, but really keeping to a schedule, keeping to a time, because I saw a lot of the chefs would get in trouble when they didn't, they waited till the end to plate. So we tried to complete all of our dishes, all the cooked sauces and proteins by the 45-minute mark. And it's a real hour start to finish. There's no breaks. There's nothing. It's really, they start the clock and it's done in an hour. And they threw a wrinkle at us. They said, you have to have a frozen ingredient, a frozen element on each dish, which really threw us for a loop too, because that was a surprise. And I mean, you try to make something and freeze it in 45 minutes. It's pretty tough. So we just focused, and I felt confident in the two chefs that were with me. They've been cooking with me for about 8 years. So we just did it, and it felt really good. It was very gratifying to win more than anything else, because I didn't want to lose. So, and Bobby was a very nice guy. He was good. So I really enjoyed the experience.
Hi, thanks for coming. We have a question from one of our remote offices, Janelle in Kirkland. Janelle, do you want to wave? Up there somewhere? There she is, in the corner.
Hi, Janelle.
She says that every chef has a signature dish, and she'd like to know what yours is.
Signature dish. You know, it's kind of asking me, like, what's your favorite dish on the menu? And my response is I like everything equally. Like, I like everything I make. If it wasn't up to like a certain level, I just wouldn't make it, or I wouldn't put it in the book. So there's a lot of things. I mean, but foods that I like and that I'm like even more passionate about is, I would say, like, ceviche is very, very important to me, and things that when we open Chifa, the Peruvian Chinese concept, we're also going to open it up to Latin, Asian as well. So we're not just, but that concept is going to have a ceviche bar, a good size one, and we're going to really emphasize on fish and making them pristine and really nice. So I would say ceviche, and one of my favorite things is shrimp ceviche. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. The food upstairs, by the way, is fantastic. Could you give us broad stroke characterizations of what Basque, Andalusian, and Catalan cuisines are?
Sure. And let's start with Andalusia, which is in the south, Costa del Sol. They are. It has a big Moroccan influence, big Moorish influence. Moors were there for several hundred years, and so there's a lot more like dry fruits, dates, figs. And they seem to grill items a little more, and there's certain dishes that are very Andalusian, like gazpacho came from that area. Another dish, salmorejo, which is another type of gazpacho thickened with bread and almonds. That's another very Andalusian style. And the food seems to be a little lighter in the south, maybe because it's warmer, a little more time of the year, and it's. Somebody described it as softer. So just yesterday, they're like, I think it's softer there. Like when you eat, like the ingredients and the way they prepare things are softer. The Basque region, which some of the main cities are Bilbao, San Sebastian, and if you go up to the French part, southwest France, you have Biarritz and Bayonne, and it surrounds the Bay of Biscay, which lends itself to a lot of fresh seafood. And they have the Pyrenees, which are right there, which also gives them some great cheeses. And the wine region is very close to there too. So it's a really great self-sustaining place in terms of food. I think eventually food will get to a point where you'll have to be in a self-sustaining area. Maybe not in the next 10 to 20 years, but down the road, I feel like it's going to happen. Like, importing food may not occur as much. That's a whole nother subject. But that area really is conducive to great wines, great cheeses, and great seafood. And the Catalan it's similar in terms of the style of seafood that they use there. And it's just more, when we were in Barcelona and the Costa Brava. And one of the things that I really recognize is this idea of a la plancha, or on the griddle. And that's why we named Mercat a la plancha, fresh market on the grill. And I went to several different chiringuitos in the Catalan region, which are restaurants on the beach that have these great seafood products that you just cook on the grill, just garlic, lemon, and that's it. And it's really a great experience. So it's still similar. they're all still kind of similar. They're very, the differences are few and far between. But that answer your question.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so my question is, there's a little bit of therapy in here too. So I'm 5 days away from marrying a Puerto Rican man, and I always feel really inadequate because his family cooks the most amazing food, and I just can't do the same. So do you have any advice for maybe a dish that I should perfect in the next 5 days to feel a little better about myself?
Well, I mean, you could really surprise people. There's a dish in there that is perfect for that particular genre you're talking about. There's a Puerto Rican pastel in there, and that is, it's pretty simple. It takes some grating, and if you have a box grater, you could do it all. And the whole thing is great because it has a Caribbean flair. So it's a Puerto Rican pastel with a shrimp enchilada, which is Cuban and can be considered Puerto Rican as well. They have a version of it. And I think you'll be, if you can do that, you'll be in good shape.
Awesome, thanks.
But it's funny because my wife's Cuban, and it's a challenge sometimes to ask her to, like, it's like anti-cooking these days. Like she goes through phases, right? And I more than anything love like a home cooked meal. So. In my household, there's my mom. My mom's a big part of our lives because our kids are growing up. She's helped us raise them from a young age. And so it's my mom, me, and my wife, and we all kind of take turns cooking. So we noticed there'd been a couple weeks where Beatriz, my wife, just stopped cooking. And we're like, hey, what, But, and it's, some of the recipes are really inspiring. So I think just gathering inspiration will help you keep going in that direction. And there's a lot of recipes in there that if you don't want to like go sourcing things on the web, and there's ingredients or recipes like vinaigrettes, different starches that you could just take out and add to different components that are a little simpler to prepare. And I think you'll be able to achieve what you need to do.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi. When I visited Spain, I was a little bit surprised that the food was much milder than at least I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as spicy as a lot of Spanish restaurants do. Did you have to adjust the menu somehow for your Spanish restaurants to more American palate, or you try to stay, close to Spain? And the second question is, the food seemed much simpler. Tapas, just a shrimp and that's it. Do you think it's possible to have a tapa place that's not, super fancy? I mean, there's some restaurants that call donuts tapa.
Sure.
So do you think it's possible to have a restaurant that would serve just the simplest 1 minute from start to finish foods and not be considered kind of a, rip-off, if you will?
Okay. To answer your first question, the foods of Spain, and sometimes when you go like to Madrid and you're just going into any restaurant, they can seem bland. They can seem very bland, and they're very much purists in terms of the way they eat. I consider 3 major ingredients there: the olive oil, almonds, garlic, and piquillo peppers, the ham, the charcuterie. And yeah, I think honestly, food, I've had people come to my restaurant and say, your food is 100 times better than I've had it in Spain. And that's the ultimate compliment. But what I try to do is really accentuate the flavors that they use. Just bring them up to another level. For instance, like a pulpo gallego, which is really cooked octopus with garlic, lemon, and smoked paprika. I may add a little more garlic. I may add a little more smoked paprika, a little more lemon, and a touch more salt, just to bring that heightened level of those ingredients. And it pulls out, by doing that, it pulls the essence of the dish, and it makes what could be a bland dish an incredible dish by just giving you the right amount of acidity and smokiness. So that's really, so if you want some good Spanish food, you have to come down to Philadelphia. That's the bottom line. And as far as I know what you're speaking of in terms of like pinchos, pinchos or other different types of tapas. Now, what I've done at Amada and Tinto is they're not really tapas restaurants. They're not really tapas bars. We have like a tapas restaurant where we take these ideas and play them up, cook them, and serve them in a restaurant style format. Whereas if you go to San Sebastian is a great place where you can go to a pincho bar and have like something that's very simply prepared on a piece of toast, like a crab and potato salad cooked on a toast, a shrimp and a mushroom on a piece of bread. That won't work here. I don't think, I just think folks are just more in tune with food and want to have a little excitement. And if you're going to do that, you have to have really good ingredients and let them speak for themselves. So.
Hi, I just had a question. I think there are a lot of misconceptions on what Latin and Spanish food really is based on, things that are out there that are so generic. What to you is really Latin Spanish food? Like, what are some of the plates that really best represent what that is? And I guess my second question is, I think ingredients are really, they're the big part of cooking. So I think it's hard to find some ingredients that there's recipes for. What would you say that the best place is to go to find these ingredients? Like, obviously, supermarket is not, but do you have to go to the Latin places mainly, or and are there any good tips to kind of use those ingredients, but kind of replace them with something else that's not as hard to find? Okay.
The first thing, your first question, the Latin, what is Latin foods? What are Spanish foods? You classify Latin food sometimes I classify it in terms of South America, and even there it's broken out into several all the different countries have many different influences. The countries on the West Coast, like Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, Venezuela, all have like a particular style, more of an Andean style of cuisine, which is totally different than if you go to Brazil, where it's more Portuguese and African. And when you go to Argentina and Chile, that's a whole nother, you could almost break the Latin piece out into like 4 different segments. And then I would classify the Caribbean as another group of Latin food. So within that Latin sphere, there's basically six groups. And then you have, I would never classify Mexican or Central American cooking in that Latin group. That's another piece. And then Spain obviously is more European, it has more European influence. So you're really talking about several different groups that you really can't put under one bubble, but that's that. The ingredients are, I think Latin supermarkets are your best bet to get most, and Latin supermarkets include Mexican products, Caribbean products, but I classify that because those supermarkets tend to gather as many of those ingredients from all those countries, and then you'll run into some imported products. When we start doing Spanish cooking, there are some specialty Spanish stores here in New York that you could actually drive and get whatever you need without going on a website. De España Foods actually has a store downtown that's really good. So the other thing that you could do when it comes to ingredients is, if it becomes very difficult, get something that's pretty close. I mean, you have to have a knowledge of what it is, but if there's boniato, for instance, which is a white sweet potato, you can substitute out a regular sweet potato and you'll be okay. So you have to really kind of have some knowledge of what the ingredient is and what the texture and flavor profile is, but ultimately a substitution can be made. Thank you.
Hi, so you haven't talked very much about Mexican influences on your food. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about Mexican regional cooking and how you've incorporated it, and if you know of any people who are doing really innovative regional Mexican food in the area?
Yes. Okay. Mexican cooking really, to me, started a long time ago. It started when I grew up in Chicago. There was a big Mexican population there. Lots of Mexican restaurants that we frequented. Many late night burritos after drinking in college. But I have traveled to the Yucatan quite a bit. Normally on vacation, there's a lot of good vacation spots there, but the Yucatan area is really, it's just it's a beautiful area, great beaches, but it has a distinct flavor profile to it. So I won't, without going into the Yucatan too much, but then you have Oaxaca, Veracruz, you have the west coast of Mexico, Mexico City. There's so many great regions there to really pull from, and they're all very distinct. More so distinct than the Spanish regions.
But you're not going to put a pig in your restaurant. You're not going to be able to do the underground cooking.
No, we won't do. We do a version of the cochinita pibil. We simulate it in do the marinade, do the whole brine, the marinade, covered in banana leaves, and slow roast it. But it's not. No, we won't dig a pit. But no, it's a really it's a great cuisine. It's one that is very rich in history. It's an ancient cuisine, and when you look at, I've had some of my chefs that have been fortunate to go from different restaurants with me, and they've seen the Latin side, the South American side, the Spanish side, and then they go and cook Mexican food, and it's just a totally different way of approaching ingredients and looking at creating dishes. Is that good?
All right. Any other questions at this time? Okay. Well, then let's give him a great big round of applause and thank you for being here. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you.